Someone once said that there was something wrong with me for coming out as a transgender female. They told me I needed help, that I was sinning, and that they would pray for me to see the light. Now, I don't usually pay attention to these types of comments, but it started to make me think about my own relationship with religion in general. Is being transgender really against God? I'm going to discuss this topic and other issues with a very special guest. You don't want to miss it. Hey everyone, Audrey here, and welcome to Transaudyssey. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. When you do subscribe, don't forget to hit that notification bell. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. This is kind of a weird topic for me because I'm not really religious at all. In fact, I have mostly negative feelings about religions that don't consider me as a real person and go out of their way to bash the trans community out of existence. To be fair, not all religious groups are this way. Many are accepting and sincere towards the LGBTQ+ community. In a previous video, I talked about the importance of finding a support network for those of us that feel alone on our journey of self-discovery. I had never considered the idea of a religious or spiritual support option before, until I watched an episode of Queer Eye. While viewing the show, I was introduced to a very inspiring individual who's also transgender. They offered guidance to a pastor who was struggling to embrace his own gay identity. The person featured was Reverend Dr. Megan, and I was so moved by the positive energy and advice that she gave to the pastor. I also knew that I had to ask Megan to be a guest on my show and talk about today's subject. Megan willingly accepted my offer, and I am so thrilled to present our conversation. So sit back and enjoy part one of the Reverend's inspirational words. Joining me now, and I'm very, very, very happy that I have my special guest today. I want to introduce Reverend Dr. Megan Rohrer to Transaudyssey. Megan, thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you. It's good to see you. You can call me Megan if you'd like. I'm happy to join you. Yeah.
And you can call me Audrey.
Perfect.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. When did you realize that you were transgender? How did it affect your life at that time? And how has it affected your dedication to, helping others?
So realizing you're transgender is kind of like how you feel about glitter. It changes over time, right? So I feel like there were little moments where my trans sparkle came out kind of throughout my life. In high school, I played in the orchestra, and you either had to wear a dress or you could wear pants and a tie. And I specifically picked one of only two instruments where female-bodied people could wear a suit and a tie. I chose the harp, right? So it was a nice little what to everyone. But so I think there are always moments where gender expresses itself, but where I started to take on language about being transgender or genderqueer, all the different ways that the language has changed even over my 40 years on this planet, was actually in seminary, in pastor school, with a group of people in Berkeley, California, who were talking about how to live authentically, how to be out about our sexual choices, and how to talk about our bodies in a liberated way. So it started by talking about feminism, and it moved towards talking about queer liberation, and then this idea that gender expression could take on a whole different meaning. And then it sort of changed after that to try to think about, well, what do I want my body to look like? Thankfully, for pastor uniforms, it's all kind of the same outfit, no matter your gender. So it's a little bit easier, and a lot of the Sunday wear kind of is designed to just cover over all of your flaps and folds. And so it's a lot easier with the uniforms to make whatever decisions you want bodily underneath. And so it really has changed and shifted kind of throughout my life, how I've spoken about it and then how I feel about it. And then for me, I had a really profound kind of experience with what it means to be transgender when my wife and I adopted 2 children. And in preschool, one of those children decided that they were going to tell their preschool family that they wanted to use the opposite pronouns that they had used before. And that was not known to the people who had placed them in our home, the social workers, for adoption. And so, it's one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, that's what a miracle is when a trans kid finds themselves adopted by a trans person and gets to live in the way that you can be trans in San Francisco as opposed to somewhere else. And so I feel like I've learned so much more about what it means to be trans by being also the parent of a Black trans child. And so I feel like there's so many different ways of knowing. And then another part of my trans identity, I think, has come from being a historian who's read kind of the letters of trans folk in different generations and thinking about faithful trans people throughout history. And so there's kind of this bodily knowing that I have about transness. There's this academic knowing that I've kind of been experimenting with, and then also this parental knowledge of all of the worries that come from wanting to care and love people outside of yourself.
Now, I want to get straight to the point here. This is based on something that I was told. Is being transgender really against the will of God?
I don't speak for God, but I do know his publicist. So that's a joke, by the way. So when I read the Bible, I think you can read the Bible in a number of different ways. You can read the Bible as a naughty and nice list, or as a guide for do these things or else. That's, for me as a Christian, I think Jesus had more things to say about faithful people who had too many rules than he had time for anyone who was going to vote on who was in and who was out. Jesus was always pushing boundaries, right? Jesus also, one of his most important kind of moments in his life story that happens in all of the Gospels is called Transfiguration. When Jesus goes on top of a mountain and becomes beaming white, Jesus has a bodily change that makes people know that Jesus is sacred. Then after Jesus dies on the cross, gets a whole bunch of scars, right? Poked in the side right here, gets some scars in a couple of places that might seem familiar to trans people. And when Jesus is resurrected and comes back into the world, the most common experience people have with this resurrected Jesus is they don't recognize his body. We don't know how Jesus's body changes in substance, but we know that it changes. And churches all over the world, when they celebrate Christ in our presence, celebrate that by naming that Jesus's body is in bread and wine, right? This body of Jesus, whatever the substance it's made of, can change, right? And I also see that in other parts of scripture going all the way back to the very beginning. So the book of Genesis has this story of Adam and Eve, right? Well, the story of Adam and Eve says that in order to separate the stuff that becomes Eve and female, Adam means clay. It means parts of the earth, right? So Adam is a gender neutral person in ancient rabbinical stories until the moment that Adam is cut with a scalpel. And the female bits are divided from the male bits. And it actually says in the text in Genesis that Adam is put to sleep beforehand, before this division and surgery happens. So what if God's very first creative act involves making this gender neutral being and then the very first gender confirmation surgery, right? Then the second story is immediately following is about God making people out of clay. And I think we have this imagination that looks a little something like the movie Ghost, where Patrick Swayze comes up and they make this perfect pot on their very first try, right? And if you've ever done pottery, you break a lot of pots in order to get one halfway decent pot, right? So there's this writing in in the book of Judges that says the creator, when making people out of clay, sometimes has to like go, oh, that's terrible, and starts over, right? And so there is this idea that people are transformed and changed. There's also a really long tradition of circumcision in biblical texts, right? And so this is a God who says surgery is required on your private parts in order to be a faithful person. And if you've ever looked at what those scars look like, circumcision scars and phalloplasty scars, very similar, a lot more similar than people who have not been circumcised. And so if Adam surgery leaves a scar here, then a lot of the ways that God is creating in the Bible look really trans. And I'm not the first person to read things this way. Actually, prior to missionaries going all over the world and colonizing different places and saying, our kind of Christianity or death, prior to that kind of historical Christianity slaughtering people around the world, trans people were thought to be the most spiritual everywhere, right? And so when I was in seminary, I found almost 300 different names and words in different languages around the world for trans people that meant like priest or sacred one or medicine person. And so I think this idea that trans people are not sacred is new in terms of world history. And I think it comes more from contemporary fear and feelings than it does from sacred texts.
And then there's that possibility that what I've been told may not be correct.
Yeah, and if people ever lied to you or any of your listeners and told you that for any part of your body that God couldn't love you because of it, I'm utterly sorry. Because I've read Paul, and Paul says nothing, neither death nor life nor principalities nor things present nor things to come can ever separate you from the love of God. And I don't know how anyone misunderstood that, but they have, and it's created such intense spiritual abuse for just more people than I could count.
Whether or not someone believes, how can religion play a part in transgender support, in supporting someone who just transitioned?
One of the things that's hard to find in our world right now is people who have faith in each other, right? There's so many people who are really quick to assume that if you don't use the right terminology, it means you're terrible. If you don't have the right outfit, it means you're terrible. If you don't have the right laws, it means you're terrible. And sometimes that's true. There's a lot of terrible things that are happening, and there's a lot of people who act in really terrible ways. But there's very few people who feel like they are supported and loved and named and claimed precisely not only for who they are today, but for who they want to be in their future. And you might not have put your faith in a higher power. You might not have put your faith in a faithful community. I mean, I gave you a lot of reasons in this history why you shouldn't put your faith in some faithful communities. But I think as a person of faith, we have to have faith in other people, right? So we have to trust that someone might make a choice about their body that's different than my choice. We have to trust that people can be loving and wise and have other ways of knowing that aren't mine. And I think that's, you can find a lot of people who really just want that kind of support. I know for me, when I wake up from surgery and I'm coming out of anesthesia, and if I can't get out of a bed for a week, I want all the people in that room to have faith in me, or at least to know what my comfort chocolates are, right? And so caring for the spirit of someone is slightly different than caring for their emotions. It mostly just means that you want to care for all of their senses as well, right? So it's people who understand the value of a beautiful smell for their recovery. or a great fabric, like a comfort softness, right?
Right.
And so it's just thinking about all the sensations, all the delights of the world, this idea that the way creation exists is mysterious and beautiful. Like there's so much medical research that just says if you have a window where you can see a tree, you do heal better, right? And so whether your way to connect to a spirituality is through nature, through science, through humans, or through sacred texts, anything that helps you heal, like embrace it.
If a transgender individual is already religious or spiritual, sometimes maybe they don't know how to blend their authentic self with their spiritual self. They can't see, they may not believe that those two can mix. What would you say to something like that?
There is a part of Paul's writing where he's talking about whether or not you should eat. Like all the grocery stores back in ancient Roman times were full, all the meat in those grocery stores, or the equivalent of a grocery store, was meat that was offered to gods that was not the approved gods. And so they had all of these conversations like, are you allowed to eat meat that was for another god? Are you allowed to participate in a festival that is outside of our rules, but I'm not breaking the rules? Like, can you have fun on Easter, even if it's actually a solstice holiday, right? And so Paul has these writings that say, there is nothing in and of itself that is unnatural. It's only made unnatural by those who think it is unnatural, which is a really complicated way of saying, if you think something is unethical or outside of your bounds, don't do it, right? If your gut is saying, I can't do this yet, I can't do this now, and it's not just the normal fears of sharing your truth, trust that your gut has some sort of truth in it. Either it wants to keep you safe if you're not in a place where it's safe to be your fullest self, or it's trying to hold on to something and preserve something. I think there's also in trans community, I don't think it's the same need to be out as there is in the LGBT community. In the LGBT community, not being out meant your partner couldn't ever come to work functions. It meant that you had to hide a part of your family. For trans community, we're talking about private parts. We're talking about medical decisions. And so I don't think you have to be high disclosing all the time. Like, I don't go to a kid's birthday party and tell them my genital history. And I hope others don't either, unless it's one of those kinds of kids' birthday parties. I haven't been to one, but right? So I think we all have moments where we are high disclosing, and maybe that's with our intimate partner or with our doctor. And then we have other moments where we're low disclosing, like at the grocery store or with people we don't want to share our truth to. And I want to support people who choose to be low disclosing in parts of their life that don't feel safe, because by golly, there are a number of people who are being murdered right now. And if being low disclosing helps keep you alive, like, I want you to embrace staying alive. But you have to balance that, right? Because if you don't have some people in your life that you can be high disclosing with, or you feel like you're always hiding, or you have to engage only in high risk behavior because you're trying to keep a secret, then that can be really dangerous and not fulfilling of your life either. So wherever people choose to be on that spectrum of being high disclosing or low disclosing, like, I support people being where they need to be. It's your private parts, for goodness sake, right? If right now, because people aren't always able to worship in person at church, it could be a good time to experiment with, what if in my local community where I live and go to church in person, I don't disclose a lot. But what if there was this online community where I could be high disclosing and people could know all of the parts of myself as an experiment to see how it goes? That online community, it's probably going to hurt less if they reject you because you're not as close to them. You can just turn it off. You don't have to listen to yucky things they might say, right? So I also want to give people the knowledge that this might be a good time to just experiment with sharing the fullness of your embodiment with faith communities, because online community makes that a little bit safer.
Wow, it was an absolute joy to talk to Megan, and for some reason I feel a little bit happier, and I learned so much. I hope you did too. Don't miss part 2 of my interview with Reverend Dr. Megan Rohrer, coming out soon. What are your thoughts about faith as a transgender person? Tell me your story. Does it have an impact on your own transgender journey? I want to know. Write your comments down below this video. I want to hear from you. As always, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I have links on my YouTube home screen, or you can just search for @OdysseyGirl. Thanks for watching, and until next time, big hugs. Bye.